Hello. I haven't been live, I think, in my regular on my Facebook page in a while, so I thought, it's a rainy day. I'm actually sitting in my car. I drove up to the foothills and drove up to a river and just sat there for a little bit until it got a little bit too drippy and just watched the ducks float by. And it was really beautiful. And I sat there thinking, okay, God, I really need to hear from you, and realizing that I needed to quiet myself really well before I was able to hear from him. And so I sat for a minute, kind of hiked down this slimy little hill, hoped that I wouldn't slide in the red mud, and really thought, okay, the world is in God's control, and I need to be at peace with that. And I think over this time frame, we have a lot of people saying, "Oh, think this and do that, and prepare for this and pay attention to that." And I realized this past week doing my challenge that I needed to really get back to that practice of being still. And what does that feel like? What does that experience? And then and really looking at the practicalities of that. Can I do that? And with so much going on, it's really hard to do. And also, I think there's a lot of information going out there about how to handle things. What you should be thinking and doing. And I thought, okay, one of the things that most commonly people have said over the years is just think happy thoughts. Just think happy thoughts. And for the past couple of years, it dawned on me, just thinking happy thoughts can sometimes actually be a lie. And so we're trying to force ourselves to believe something that really isn't true. And that makes it really hard. And so years ago, a good friend of mine actually said, you can't think your way out of clinical depression. It's not just a thinking process. And I remember at first kind of being challenged by that. So there's two different types of depression. One is situational, and the other one is biochemical. So in other words, you can be depressed, like physiologically, your body's not producing what you need in order to be able to have emotional stability. And then there's situational, which is my situation is really, really hard to deal with, and I'm not coping with it well, and it can cause me to be depressed. And so I remember after her making that statement of you just can't think your way out of depression, I thought, okay, is there, in her situation, she has very clinical, very, very deep clinical physiological depression and other things that were added to that. But I knew that for myself, being raised in a very dysfunctional environment, I had learned a lot of things and struggled with a lot of things that caused me to be depressed. And I had to relearn some of the thoughts that I had, some of the things that I believed. I had to learn that it wasn't always just a chemical issue. I had to learn that what I believed wasn't true. What I believed wasn't true. And so when somebody says, "Oh, just think happy thoughts, just remember happy things," and so today I went and sat by the river, and I'm sitting there, and it's kind of getting drippy, and I'm thinking, okay, God owns everything. He owns the planet. I worship and I honor Him. In this moment, I am okay. In this moment, I am okay. That's not thinking happy thoughts. That's not going, "Oh, it's going to be beautiful. It's going to be great. When this is over, we're all going to be fantastic. Everything's going to be fine and wonderful." It's really learning to say what is true. And sometimes just focusing on what is true can be helpful to stabilize us when we're having challenging times, and say what is true in the moment. And so one of the hardest things for people to do is to stay present. Hi. Just to stay present. How do I stay present? And even what does that mean? And so some of that is being able to say, I had a client one time that said, what are 5 things you can see, and actually say them out loud. I can see green trees. I can see the rain on my windshield. I can see the cars going by. Really focusing on what 5 things you can see right now, staying present. And then 4 things that you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can taste, and 1 thing that you can smell, or something like that. Just really how to stay present, how to say what is true right now. What is true right now? And being present in the moment. And it actually helps us be a little more rational with our decision-making processes, to be able to make really concrete decisions that are actually beneficial and not being emotionally reactive, because if we start focusing on how we're feeling about things and making decisions on how we feel, and we're not present, we're not calm in the moment, then we're not going to be able to be intelligent in the way we respond to stuff. Hey, Barry, and Natalie and Sandra. So my biggest challenge is to say, okay, how do I stay now present in the moment, and stay calm, and be present, and just notice what's happening in the moment before I make decisions on how I'm going to respond to stuff. And so when people, I just remember, I have friends who I'm like, yeah, well, this is going, they're like, well, God thinks this, or well, it's only going to be short term, or well, and it's like, okay, you're not hearing me for right now in my moment, that this is my experience in the moment right now, in the truthfulness of the moment, and because they're the happy thoughts people. They're like, oh, well, we're just going to think happy thoughts. And there's a difference between being happy thoughts and then being assured about the facts of the future. So the reality is that all of our quarantiningness is not going to be permanent. That is a fact. And so we can be resolved in that fact that some of it is actually going to change. Hey, Jesse. And so how do we focus on the fact that that's going to change? Now, that's not a happy thoughts thing. It's not, I'm just going to be thinking happy thoughts. That's a fact. And really learning how to differentiate between what is true and what is feeling is the thing where I spend most of my time with people. To say, okay, I really feel crappy, for lack of a better word, that about what's happening right now. That's a feeling that I'm having. And I can say, okay, but what am I going to do about that? It's not I'm going to just sit and feel that. And one of the things that I have people do when they're feeling emotional is to put words to how they feel. So a lot of times people say, well, I'm going to fall apart, and they cry, but they don't. And I'm like, it's good to express your emotions, but if you don't put words to your emotions, then you're not going to actually be able to process them. You're just having emotions, and you're just having emotions. But if you say, I'm really sad because I miss X, I miss going to the store or going to visit my neighbors. So like, I know there's some elderly folks that I used to try to drive by their house every time I'd go into town and just swing by their house because they're basically shut-ins. And I feel sad that I can't, and it gives me, it's like, oh, and my mind goes to that place, oh, that's just one more thing I can't do right now. And I need to stop that and say, okay, that's not helpful or effective thinking, right? It's like, but it's not like, oh, it's all going to be over and it's all going to be fine. It's like, and try not to swing the other way. It's like, how do we just be rational and saying, well, this is sad. I mean, it's sad that they're alone and we can't connect with them, but it's not devastating. And then the other thing that I really try to help people with is to not personalize how they feel. So when they say, so if I took like the visiting my neighbors thing to that, use that as an example. Hey, Donna, that I can't go visit my neighbors because of the quarantine issue. So therefore I am a bad person. And that makes me a bad neighbor, bad friend, bad Christian, bad whatever. That's taking it to that extreme. To be able to say it's sad, but it doesn't make me bad. I think that's the one thing that people have the hardest time with, is what is the difference between I dislike my situation versus I dislike myself. What does the situation say about who I am? And so, again, people will say, well, so one of the challenges that I do with people, I say, okay, put your hands on your knees, and hey, Bonnie, and tap your knees slowly, and then say 5 good things about yourself. So if you had to do that, and tap your knees really slowly, and say, what are 5 good things about me? And I tell people, don't do something super flowery, but just truthful. I'm kind, generous, a good listener. I'm a good gardener. Friendly. Just 5 simple things that are good about who you are, and to say that those are truthful things. And I have had people before who say, oh, I can't do that. I say, well, are you this? Are you this? I'm like, well, yeah. I said, well, what would your friends say about you? What would your friends say? Well, they would say I'm this. They'd say I'm funny. They'd say I'm this. I'm smart. I'm blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, but what are your friends liars? I mean, do they lie? And they're like, well, no. And it's like, okay, but then can you believe those things to be true about you? So again, it's how do we focus on what is true versus how things feel? And I think that's going to help us cope in this time right now where there's like so much feeling. Everybody's feeling everything right now. And we'll say, okay, what is true? How do we settle ourselves down into what is actually true? And so yesterday I did a live inside of one of my groups, and I asked people, if you were part of the body, I use the body of Christ, but if we saw the body of humanity, what part of the body would you be? What part of the body would you be? And so so one of them said that they'd be the arms because they're a very welcoming person and they enjoy welcoming people into their environment, into their church and that sort of thing. And one of the other ladies says that they were an ear because they're a good listener. So if you were to label yourself as part of the body of humanity, what part of the body would you be? So type that in. I think I should be able to see if you type that in. What part of the body would you be? And it was hard for me because I focus on people's spirituality typically, but I said I had to admit I would have to be the mouth because I talk a lot. But think about that. I was relaying to them the story about how Francis Chan was doing the sermon on the body of the Christ, and he had this paper bag and he pulled out this plastic foot, and he says, we can, if we're a foot. And that's an important part. If we decide, okay, I'm just the foot and I don't matter, then what would happen with the rest of the body? Well, it's limping along because the foot's going, I'm not going to be the foot, and you can't make me be the foot, and I want to be something else. But if you're not who you are made to be, as far in all of humanity, and expressing that well, then the entire body of humanity actually suffers. And so, what would you think for yourself as part of the body of humanity? I don't know if anybody's typed anything in. It's hard for me to see here. And so the whole goal is to really focus on what is true. What is true about you? What are the things that are good about you, that are factual about you? And then really being able to differentiate. Is this a feeling issue? Is this a struggle that I'm having that's emotional, or is it actual factual? And hey, Natalie, you're the hair. Natalie is the hair of the body. And now, Natalie, is that because you have beautiful hair, or because can you explain that? That's wonderful. Yeah. Somebody else was saying that they were the heart, and so if you think about the part of the body of humanity that you are, I'd say Christelle would be the smile, because you have a beautiful smile, the joy, and then also, what was the other one? So what is the part of the body of Christ that you? Oh, and the other one was, which is kind of a no-brainer for me. If there was one thing. Oh, I cover people. Oh, beautiful. That's a beautiful thing. Yes. So we definitely all need a covering. Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Yes. We should not be without a covering. That's so absolutely valuable. And the other question that I asked was, if there was one thing when you think about your own emotional maturity. So emotional maturity, the way I define it all the time to my clients is, the ability to tolerate uncomfortable emotions. Okay, so the ability to tolerate uncomfortable emotions. So Julie says she wants to be the heart. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Let me see I'm afraid I'm going to lose you guys. I'm afraid my battery's going to die here. And I don't know if I can do this without making sure I know. And so, stop. There we go. So, if there was one, so emotional maturity is the ability to tolerate uncomfortable emotions. And so, if there was one thing that you need right now, one thing in one word, what's one word that you would use, that you would need right now for you to have that confidence? What would it be? And so last night, somebody said, several people actually said clarity. They needed clarity. What is something that you need? And as you guys, hopefully you guys are reading each other's comments on that. I mean, to think about all the different ways that as the body of believers that we can come together and say, you know what, I need a listening ear, or I need someone who is welcoming, or I need someone who has that heart, or someone who can speak into my life. As we think about each portion of the body that we are, to embrace that about each other. And I talked about years and years ago how my in my church there was this little old lady who would pray, and she would pray so hard, and it was like so amazing, and I used to like just so desperately want to be her. And as the years went by, I had to realize, God made me different on purpose. And so I had to learn how to embrace who I was and know that it wasn't necessarily, one wasn't better than the other. That my particular desire is to be honored, to be truthful to the call of God in my life. And so Julie says favor. Yes. Okay, Julie says favor. So God, we ask that you would grant Julie favor out of your abundance, your huge abundance that you can grant at any time. And so we ask that you would give that to her in a unique way so that she knows it's yours. In the name of Jesus. Hey, Virginia. Yes, it's Caleb. I am here, ready to march on. Gonna go pick me some fruit and bring it back and say, who cares about giants, right? And so, so what is it? So the questions on the table are what is it? What part of the body of Christ are you? And can you embrace that and love that and enjoy that and be able to say, this is who I am, and then lean into that. I think one of the things about being affiliated with some entrepreneurial things is like, I don't know what part I am. I just don't know. And so to be able to just think, okay, what if I lined up all of my friends and said, okay, you're the ear, and you're the arms, and you're the hair, and you're the, to be able to say, I am the mouthpiece. I really have had to embrace the concept of being the mouthpiece of God. So when I share that story about the day that God made you, I had to embrace that and say, this is my role, and this is what God has done for me and what He's gifted me for. And to be able to say, okay, I'm a good listener, and we need good listeners. And then we also need people who are welcoming and embracing. We need people who know how to cover people, and to know that those are valuable and good and purposeful, and not to look down on yourself in any way because you're not what somebody else either expects you to be, told you that you should be. But when we center ourselves before God and He says, this is what I have gifted you for, it's amazing. It's amazing what can happen when we embrace that and accept that and then lean into that and then utilize other people to encourage that. Virginia, you're asking me way too many questions and they're scrolling by too fast. And so I think that, so again, what is the one thing that you need? What is one thing that you need? So clarity, confidence, direction is something that's also very common. Identity. So most of you know, I wish there was a way I could stick this so I didn't have to hold it without losing you guys. Talking about identity. I mean, everything that I do is all about identity. And Pastora Loida, yes, the mouth. And it's true, because I was thinking about that, about not being in the ear. Sorry, I shouldn't look at the comments while I'm talking. So I was thinking about my friend who said she was an ear. I think it was Nancy. And I thought, I should be a good listener because I'm a licensed therapist, so I should be a good listener. But it's like I listen to a certain point, and then I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. And so when it comes to just listening, like just sitting and listening, I'm probably not so hot with that because I really want to be a helper. And that's where my codependency comes in. But I really believe, too, that we've been gifted with wisdom to help each other, not to just sit back and listen. We need those people who have the ability to just hear our hearts. Absolutely, just to hear our hearts. And so the other thing, about identity, it was interesting because, I've talked about identity abuse for 7 7, 8 years now. And identity, people, I remember all the time people say, oh, your identity in Christ. I'm like, what does that mean? Can somebody tell me what that means? I mean, I don't understand. How is my identity in Christ? And then really looking at when God revealed to me that I have an identity, that He designed me, and that when He dictates who I am, and I receive that dictate. Okay, so God says, this is who you are, and because of what Christ has done, this is how God sees me. This is who I am. That is my identity. And then when I realized that God revealed to me that our identities can be abused, so that actually our identity doesn't, I guess technically it doesn't get abused, but our perception of our identity gets abused. So when our perception of ourselves gets damaged, it can happen in such subtle ways we're not even aware of it. And so I told the story, I often tell the story about that day that my mom confronted me about my dad molesting me in front of my dad, and my dad lied about it. And excuse me, and because of that, I just like figured, why ever talk about it again? Why ever? And if I tell the truth, nobody's gonna care. And I remember after my dad went to jail, my mom even asked me. She's like, "Well, why didn't you ever say anything?" I said, "I did." And she says, "Well, why didn't you say anything again?" And I said, "Well, if you didn't believe me the first time, why would you believe me the second time?" And so I learned things about myself at a really young age, and because I just absorbed it as true, which is I don't matter and my message doesn't matter, then I'm not aware I'm absorbing that message. I wasn't old enough to say, well, I'm just going to start thinking this about myself. That's not the way identity abuse happens. Identity abuse is very subtle, and the enemy will come in and he'll try to get you to believe things about yourself that isn't true. And so it can be perception. So like middle children who feel displaced, or let me see if I can do this here. People who are who see things on TV, like children who watch violent things or see pornography or anything like that. They're absorbing stuff about what they perceive then as true because they've got nothing to compare it with. And so then they grow up with this sense of identity, and then they have struggles when they're older, and they're like, why? And people say, well, my past shouldn't bother me anymore. I should be over it by now. And I'm like, oh yes, but if it's damage, then, and we're never taught how to look at those messages that we received and what is true, and then when we start. So I actually asked somebody last night, and it really kind of impacted her. But I want you to think about the most negative thing. What is the most negative thing you've ever thought about yourself? What's the most negative thing that you've ever thought about yourself? And then go back in time and think about the first time you ever felt that way. The first time you ever thought that thought about yourself. And that's very indicative of when the damage occurred. And so really looking at the messages that we have and where they came from. And it's so super helpful to say, okay, I'm not going to attribute this to myself. I'm going to attribute this to the enemy because it wasn't from God. Okay. And so being able to say, okay, I have this information and I am believing it. Where did the message come from? And I've had clients who've had like really traumatic events in junior high school, and so they started believing things about themselves, and they carried it well into adulthood, and be able to say, okay, who do you want to put energy into? What God says is true about you, or what these people in junior high school said about you? And so I really try to help people just really press through to what is true rather than what feels true. So a lot of times people say, well, I've always felt this way. Well, yeah, because it happened at a really young age, and so you've always felt that way. But it's just been a feeling. And so when I talk about my life coaching, the three things that I cover are your identity. You do have an identity, and we can talk about that, and we can discover that, and you can get to know who you are. The second one is the enemy always lies. Whether it's media, your neighbor, your grandparents, the school system, the church. I mean, all people can lie to you from all over the place. Okay, so there's like gobs of places where you can receive lies from, and they say over 3,000 messages a day. How many of those messages that you get every day are actually God-fearing, honest, truthful messages? And then the third thing is you can choose to believe things that don't feel true. You can choose to believe things that don't feel true. And I don't know if I tell this all the time this story, and I'm not really sure how well it resonates, but this is so somebody can tell me if this is, actually is a good example or not. But I think about the time where everybody thought the world was flat. Thousands of years, world's flat, no big deal, right? Everybody assumed that. And so imagine if you were living in that era where everybody thought the world was flat. And so then you're probably like around 35 and they go, no, the world's round. Now everything in your mind is the world's flat. I walk off the edge of the earth's it's flat. That's just the way it is. And then all of a sudden somebody's like, no, that's not true. And you suddenly have to change everything that you believe to be based on this new truth. And how hard would that be in the middle of your life to say, wow, I got to totally believe something completely different than everything that I was raised with that was normal for everybody all my life. It's extremely hard to do, but it's not impossible. So people have told me before, you make it sound so simple, because I really truly believe that it is simple. The concepts are simple. God did not make all this so complicated that only the wise could understand it. He tells us, that children are the ones that will enter into the kingdom of heaven more easily. And so the simplicity is, I can choose what is true, and I can get my feelings to be in line with what is true. And that's the challenge. Do not let your emotions dictate what you believe is true. And I remember somebody, thank you, Daniel, I appreciate that. I remember somebody, I was in a discussion with an atheist one time who said, I just can't believe that. And I said, well, you can actually believe anything you want. And she's like, well, how can you do that? And I said, well, the reality is that there's people who believe that cows are holy, and they don't eat cows because they're holy. And I said, and if I was raised with that, I could do that. And she's like, how could you do that? And I said, I would choose to do that. She goes, but you can't do that because, see, she's basing it on how it feels rather than what is true. And I had somebody else get upset at me a couple weeks ago about my faith, and just was like really, really in my face about it. And they said, well, you're God, this and that and the other. And I said, well, my faith. And they said, well, how can you do that? And they said, what I believe is foundational. And I said, well, my faith is foundational. She goes, well, you get to choose your faith. And I said, but I believe it's true. And to get to that place to say, this is what is true. I believe it's true. And I live my life because it's true. It's not a matter of, and so you get to choose what you believe. And you can choose how you feel, or you can choose what you believe. And so, that's what I do with my coaching clients. That's predominantly what I spend the vast majority of my time, is pressing through. Why do you believe that? Where did that come from? How do we discover what is the truth based on these circumstances? And then walk in truth every day rather than walking in what I feel every day. And so, so Julie asks, are you familiar with what's going on with kids on social media? It's like devastating, and I would do everything I could to remove all social media away from children if I could, just simply because there's no control. It's really chronic and it's bad. And actually, one of my speakers in my challenge earlier in the week actually runs Porn Free Colorado, and she's trying with all her might to remove all porn from the country of Colorado, from the state of Colorado. And so, yeah, she gave us some statistics on all the how young people are before they're exposed to that, and how social media is just rampant with that. And also even our clergy, I think the statistics for clergy struggles with that is really high, really, really high. And we and honestly, so I'm going to give you, and then I'm going to have to let you go because my back is killing me. I'm going to give you my little spiel about addiction. And so all addiction is the same in my book to a certain extent. People are enticed into something that they normally wouldn't do because they want to change how they feel. So this all goes back to feeling, okay? When we talk about identity abuse, and it's all feeling based, okay? Truth is being replaced by feeling. So I don't like the way I feel, so I'm going to try this thing. Somebody's going, hey Heather, this is a cool thing. I'm going to try this new thing because it's going to make me feel better. And then they like it, and it was easy. So whether it's gambling, shopping, porn, sugar, it doesn't matter what it is. something made you feel better, it was easy access, and you did it. So it can be drugs, it can be alcohol, it can be any kind of addiction. So it's changing the way you feel. The challenge is going back and saying, when I'm not utilizing this particular thing to make me feel different, what is it about my life that I don't like? What is it when I'm sober from whatever it is that's keeping me from just being able to be satisfied with life? And when you figure that out, you're going to be able to then overcome whatever addiction you have. Now, I had this conversation with my mom the other day, and she's like, yeah, but then there's medical addiction, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so there's a time when your body actually genuinely gets addicted to it. So then it becomes an actual problem, a medical problem. But if you go back to the cause, what was it that caused me to try this thing in the first place? And people will say, it's intolerable, I need to go. And so I have my clients, if they have addiction problems, to look at what was happening in their day that caused them to start feeling drawn to their addiction. And they typically will be able to say, such and such happened, this happened, that happened. And a lot of times they just don't like themselves. And so before it becomes a physical problem, there's a very high emotional problem. And so that's why, if you're even, like, I used to use mountain climbing. If you're a mountain climber, you got to climb higher and higher and higher to get that rush. So there's something about that rush of being able to do it and getting higher, higher, higher. And so when you look at what is it that you use to make yourself feel better instead of being just who you are, I think it'll help you understand a little bit more what you're running from. And so hopefully that helps somebody, because in my book I just put addiction is addiction. It doesn't matter what you're addicted to. There's a spiritual underlying problem that's promoting that spiritual addiction, that addiction. There's an underlying emotional hook, and the enemy always uses emotion. He will use an emotion over and over and over again to get you to buy in emotionally to something. And think about it. Every temptation is emotional. I mean, it's not gonna be like a rational temptation. There's no such thing as a rational temptation, because if it was rational, you wouldn't do it. And I think the more you realize how emotional it is, that you'll be able to say, do I want to give into something that's emotional versus something that's intellectual, that's wise, and also is it godly? Is this thing that you're about to do being driven by an emotion or by God? And it's I would love to just like spread this word everywhere. We have to get to the place where we can choose to walk in wisdom and truth rather than happiness or the way we feel. Because if we start substituting our bad feelings with happiness, and we're going to be happy instead of factual, then when we start feeling bad, we just swing all the way the other way. And I notice that with a lot of people, though, especially people getting out of violent relationships, that they get that determination. I'm going to step up. I'm going to get out, but then they swing all the way the other way from being this really docile, beaten down person to being this really angry, violent, aggressive person. And it's like, how do we get out of doing things because of emotion, but doing things because they're wise? And so I really, really hope that this is helpful to you guys during these really kind of strange times that we're in, to say, how am I going to lean into what is true? How do I stay present right now? What are my personal giftings? What am I as a part of the body of humanity? What are my personal giftings? What do I truly need right now? What do I truly need right now? Be willing to go and access help for that, and then utilize facts as often as possible, and say, I'm not gonna move based on emotion. And most of you know, well, I hope most of you know that I do I do a 1 hour free session with everybody. And last night it was kind of it was funny. I was talking about my mom. I was telling my mom, I'm like, hey, so I do this 1 hour free session. She says, don't. Now my mom is not a believer, but I love her to pieces. And she's like, you can't do that. You can't do that. She goes, you need to charge them. I said, I can't. And so my friend Nancy, she goes, yeah, the first 15 minutes, it's just like it goes by so fast. And plus, I love being able to encourage people, help people. It's just really this clarifying, spending an hour just really kind of clarifying who you are, your goals, what your life's passions are, what resources that you have. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy doing it. So if it's something that you're interested in, go ahead and DM me, and I'd love to do that with you. But I really hope that during this time that you'll be able to lean into the truths of God, the truths of who you are, and allow the truth to overcome the feelings that you have that may most likely, if they're negative, come from the enemy. But don't let that dictate how you respond to your current situation. So I love you guys, and I hope to see you soon. Take care.